Right, typed up this program here, and it's the morning temp one. So the definition of the program, it's called morning. It accepts a variable, which it stores as temp. It accepts a value, which is stored in the variable temp. While temp is greater than 20, this I think you might be a bit confused about this, because if this return statement wasn't here, say if you send it the value 22, well, 22 is going to be greater than 20, so it's double temp equals temp times 2. And then it's just going to do this again, because temp hasn't changed, so temp is still equal to 22, so it just creates that again. And I'll just demonstrate this to you. Print stuck in a loop, and I'll send it the value of 22. So load program, load program, and you can see it's just hung. I'm not sure why it's not printing it out, but it has hung. Okay, it's just crashed, so I have to stop that. You see here, it was just stuck in a loop, printing that out over and over and over and over again. So you need to be careful. I think what you want here is if, because you've got an else there. So if the temperature is greater than 2, double temp equals temp times 2, and then return double temp. Else, if temp is 20 or less, then we print now. Temperature is not very high. Q equals tomorrow may be warmer. Return Q. Alright, so what we've got here is if I do morning 22, it doesn't actually appear to do anything. The reason why, if we run through it, if we go morning 22, so it sends the value 22 up to the definition or the function morning. 22 is stored in the variable temperature. So we do this first check. If temp is greater than 20, and now you wouldn't have noticed anything with the while loop, it would have still done it because you had the return thing immediately after, so it wasn't going to get you caught in a loop, but only because of that return value. But I think what you actually want here is an if statement, because you're only ever doing the while loop once, because you've got that return statement in there, so it'll never do it more than once. So if is probably what you're after. So if temp is greater than 20, and it is because temp is 22, well, let's create a new variable called double temp equals temp times 2, so that should be 44. We return double temp. Now, as soon as we get to this return bit, it returns the value double temp back to here, but it doesn't do anything with it. So it's not actually storing it anywhere, it's not telling it to output it, it's not telling it to add to anything. It's basically, we could just type 44 there, you see it doesn't throw an error, and that's the equivalent. So all it's doing is returning that value to here. Python says, oh, an integer. What do I do with it? Nothing. Ignore it. Let's move on. So it doesn't do anything with it, even though the program is working properly. So we'll hash that one out. The second one is pretty much the same thing, except the reason you're getting an output is because instead of saying 22, it comes in here and goes, okay, send the value 2 up to here. Temp becomes 2. So if temp is greater than 20, no it's not. Okay, so we go down here and we go print now, temp not very high, which is what it does. So temp not very high. And then we go Q equals tomorrow may be warmer, return Q. The reason it doesn't say tomorrow may be warmer anywhere is because you haven't done anything with Q. You haven't told it what to do. All you've told it to do is basically resolve that definition or resolve that function with that value, and it does, and it doesn't do anything with it. Now we go to this one here, and we've got print now morning 22. It's going to print the value 44. So remember when I said before, after this resolves, it just comes down to 44. That's exactly what's going to happen here. 44. So when it gets to here, it returns double temp, and it returns it to the print now function. Everything kind of works from the inside out. So when it does this, it doesn't do print now first. It needs to find out what morning 22 actually resolves to. So morning 22 does its thing. It returns a value, 44, and then print now goes, okay, print now the result of morning 22, which is 44. And that's what we get down the bottom here. Finally, we've got assigning the result of morning 22 to I, and then print now I. This should also print 44. Okay, it's just a longer way of doing this here. So morning 22 resolves to 44, so I equals 44. Print now I, which will print 44. Now if we do morning 2, I is going to become a string now. I is going to become Q. And it should say tomorrow, temp not very high, tomorrow may be warmer. The reason it says temp not very high is because that's printing from inside the function. Then Q is equal to a string. And then we return Q, which is the result of morning 2. So I equals tomorrow may be warmer, because that's the value that's returned. Print now I, tomorrow may be warmer. So that's how that function is working there. When you say, how do you know where your return is going to? It's going to go either it's going to go back to where you called it. So essentially, whatever values get returned, they're just going to be put into the Python code wherever that function was called from. So in this case, Q is going to be put here. So it's kind of the same way, same as doing this. Now, why wouldn't you do that? Well, we don't know what the temperature is. Maybe the temperature varies, and so we will get a different response on different days. So you wouldn't want to hard code something like that. You would want to let it maybe pull the temperature from a thermometer that it might be connected up to through some inputs, and then you can have it log some different things depending on what the temperature is. So you don't want to hard code everything. That's why functions are really useful, because they can give you different results based on different input data. So the output for 22 is different to the output for 2. What's the difference between indenting inside a while loop or similar while having at the end of a function? So see how you've got 2 returns here? Only one of them will ever be executed. And if I did something like this, return double temp, return temp, these lines here are essentially redundant. It will never execute them ever, because as soon as it gets to this one, return Q, it actually quits out of the function. So return has 2 purposes. One, it returns the value, or 2, it can be used to quit a function early. So say if the function is going to throw an error, and you know it's going to throw an error because maybe you've centered a value like 0 and you wanted to divide by 0, so you might just quit out of the function before it gets to that particular part if the initial variables don't pass a value check or something. So if the divided by number is a 0, you can return. You can return an error. This is not a valid division operation or something like that. So these 2 here, as soon as this works, you'll see here it'll still say, oops, Q equals tomorrow may be warmer. It'll still say that. It doesn't say Q equals temp, because it never executes these lines here. In fact, I can demonstrate that as well. This line will not print. Okay, it does not print. It doesn't do anything after the return statement. So you can use it up here to return, because if this wasn't here, it would still return Q. So it would go, well, let's see, if temp is greater than 20, so let's go down and just change this to 22. Double temp equals temp times 2. Else, well, it won't print that because that statement was true. But then it will just return Q, because it goes on to do this other part here. So it does this, that's true, it does this, it ignores this, and then it does this here. So that's why we want it to return up here. After that if condition has resolved and done its thing, we want to return the value and we want to ignore everything else. And same down here. Once we get to the end, we want to return that value. So that's how that works there.